everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea, and we're back. Hello, everybody. This is the first new recording session that we're having for a normal Jams and Tea episode so far in the last couple of months. If you did not catch our brief little recap video that you should check out, it's a bunch of stuff that we recorded earlier this year that we just didn't really have time to edit. I explain more in that video, but go check it out. But we're back for the time being, so revel in our fucking lameness. I don't fucking know, man. I'm just glad that some
It's
people missed this.
your
Hello.
your audio kind of clipped for a second and it sounded like you said, "We're here and we're black."
I didn't get that. Try again.
You triggered Siri. Oh
I
my
did.
God.
I didn't even know that was down here.
Thank you to Jake for putting that video together as well. And thank you for putting that intro together as well, in which you appear to be recording from the surface of the sun.
I literally put on like one color correction filter because it looked like shit, and then it looked like that, and I'm like, this is whatever.
It's like genuinely concerning.
Yep.
Anyway,
Yep.
we are going to be going through some recent news in music today, as well as reviewing some recent releases that have garnered a lot of buzz that we're really excited about, that we just want to talk about. So let's start with some news. We did a video earlier this year because A24 announced a covers album of all of the songs in Jonathan Demme's Talking Heads concert film, Stop Making Sense. And so we did a video in which we fan casted who we felt should have covered all those songs. And I mention this because it seems to be a bit of a trend now with bands doing this for like major reissues or commemorating certain anniversaries of certain albums. We have two late 90s heaters getting reissues this year. American Football's first self-titled album, and Refused's The Shape of Punk to Come, both getting these band endorsed tribute albums where a different act covers each song. And this is an interesting trend. I think it seems to be a thing that more bands are doing now. I think it's really cool. It's a fun idea, but of course it does provide an avenue for critique, and for like like we did with Stop Making Sense, going like, why did they do that? They should have done this instead. Although, to be honest, for the most part, I don't really feel that way about these. The American Football one is especially good. There's a great Iron and Wine cover of Never Meant, and an astonishing Ethel Cain cover of For Sure, which is like, by the way, if you're not super familiar with the album, that's like a 2.5-3 minute sort of interstitial song on the album, and Ethel Cain stretches it into 10 minutes of like dream pop gorgeousness. It's utterly incredible. It's like, if you enjoy what she was doing on American Teenager, then this cover of American Football is amazing. I know you really enjoyed it as well, Jake.
I've naturally been watching Hayden ever since Preacher's Daughter, just because self-made, self-produced artist making their own work, and I want to see whenever she releases music. And so like we've gotten things like the sort of quasi-spiritual tribute to the film Bones and All, which she released, which is a great song. And also she had a song called From the River to the Sea earlier this year for the children of Palestine. And now we have this, and I'm so thrilled that not only is Ethel Cain still making music despite being thrust into a spotlight that she was not prepared for, she's doing crazy shit like this. Because, again, turning an interstitial track into this 10-minute post-rock ambient pop song that, if you're a fan of Grouper, I can't recommend this enough, because it sounds just like something on like Dead Deer Being Dragged Up a Hill, or like it's got that moody, ethereal texture and that absolutely flawless vocal presence on there, which is just chef kiss. Beautiful.
It has that grouper vocal cadence, but I also thought of like Mazzy Star, just in this like,
yes,
she has a kind of Hope Sandoval thing to her voice where it just sounds so huge and beautiful, and the guitars have that, because Mazzy Star and American Football to begin with are not actually a million miles away from each other, so that kind of really pretty guitar tones, essentially. And if you're going to cover an American Football song, the most important thing to do is be able to capture those particularly pretty guitar tones, and she really does that.
The cover of Stay Home on that album is being done by Manchester Orchestra. So I expect nothing but a pile of bones by the time I finished that.
Yeah, and that's like an 8-minute song as well. So I'm really
That
interested.
is the American football song to me.
Yeah.
She is that bitch.
Yeah.
Can't fault that. I think my favorite on the album is Honestly, but Stay Home is way up there.
Yeah.
Anyway, more of a mixed bag is the refused Shape of Punk to Come announcement. I actually don't know if they've released any of these songs yet. I haven't heard any
Don't
of
think
these
so.
covers if they have, but I just want to kind of walk through and get your guys' thoughts on some of the choices here. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. The definitive Refused song, New Noise. That's the one. If anyone knows a Refused song, that's the one they know.
If you watch The Bear, you know that song. They use it like 7 times.
It's being covered by idols. Because
Boo.
idols are, of course, the shape of punk.
They
Ah,
are
ah.
there's certainly some kind of shape. I was
Yeah.
thinking more of a bulbous, globby mass.
Yeah,
Bulbous.
the shape of poop to come.
Fast and bulbous.
Yeah, so idols are covering New Noise. There's also a cover of New Noise from. It's like I'm pretty sure this is a rapper, but I've never known how to say their name because it's a mixture of letters and numbers. Yeah, it's a punk
it-
rap. It's a punk rap band, and I think they're just called Horror, but they're spelled.
Yeah, they are. Horror.
Yeah, yeah. So that will be really, really cool, I think. More than Idols anyway. And there's also, look, there's other great bands on here as well. Quicksand, Brutus, Fucked Up, Cold Cave, Cult of Luna, and of course the Apollo program was a hoax is getting a cover from Touche Amore. So like
Mm.
Not to mention that there is a new Touche Amore album on the horizon as well.
Oh shit! I didn't even know that.
Oh yes, there is too. Yes, they dropped a single. I remember this now. I heard it.
Oh.
I did listen to it once. It's always
Two
good
now
to-
is I don't remember what the first one's called, but the second is called Hal Ashby.
Oh.
Jeremy
They
Hell
made
yeah.
this one for you, Riley.
Jeremy Baum is like has become quite a personality in like I guess the punk world. I suppose he has a podcast where he has a podcast I think where he talks about like the first job you ever had with different musicians and different artists and stuff. He's like really grown into like being a kind of personality, which is really, really cool to see. Touche Amore,
And can I just say, I love the new Touche Amore album cover. It's so like I see it and I'm like, that's a Touche Amore album cover, all right. And I also, Julian Baker is featured on the closer.
That's right.
Let's fucking go.
That's right. They're stealing that stage 4 sauce.
And Julian's showing up on some crazy shit in these last couple of years. She was on that Armed album last year.
Yeah.
Shit, man.
She's like, she's about due, I would say, for her own LP4. Like, I would very much like to have her back soon. But yeah, no, really excited to hear that Touche Amore album. The song she's on stage 4 is my favorite Touche Amore song. So,
Which one is that one?
Skyscraper.
Skyscraper.
The last
Oh
song.
God,
Yeah.
yeah.
I actually can't. That's a song I can't listen to without crying. Like, not even as an exaggeration. I just can't. All right, so that's we'll see how those shape up. There's reasons to be excited. Even more of a reason to be excited is that our very own August was recently featured in a music video for a single from the upcoming album from Cursive. So real Nebraska core here. August, why don't you talk a little bit about this experience and what happened?
So I guess first I'll mention how this came about. So my mom just randomly mentioned to me, "Hey, would you like to be in the new Cursive music video?" And I was like, "Excuse me."
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just can't. It is so funny that you can say the sentence, "My mom walked into a room and said, 'Do you want to be in the new Cursive music video?' is one of the most borderline crazy things anyone's ever said without lying."
Mums around the world love the ugly organ. What can we say?
So I suppose for context, she's friends with Katie Catcher, who is Tim Catcher's, I'm going to butcher this, I believe they're cousins. And she said that apparently Tim and the band needed more people to kind of fill the area out. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And then I was thinking, wait, now who else in Nebraska do I know
Who loves
is
cursive?
who loves cursive? Gems and Tea featured friend of the podcast, Connor. So I gave him I shot him a text. I was like, hey, are you free this day? He was like, hell yeah. We were told to go to O'Leaver's, which is a bar in kind of the Midtown Omaha. And for context, this is like kind of the kind of hole in the wall, like, every kind of punkish band from that Saddle Creek scene would have cut their teeth there to some extent. So that's another bit of cool trivia for you. And it is also incidentally a bar that is just off of the real Saddle Creek street for which the record company is named.
Wow.
That's so fucking cool.
So there's some fun Omaha trivia for you. Anyway, we were told up to show up in costume without much of a specification as to what those costumes should look like. So I ended up wearing a plague doctor costume, and Connor brought with him a Cuphead mask.
Amazing choices. Yeah, that's just like the fact that can happen is just so fucking insanely sick to me. Like, just existing at a juncture, like at a place that's like famed for like a particular era and style of music and certain bands. And I associate all these bands so much with like the early 2000s and a particular point in time. And so it's so cool, like not just when they continue to put out new music as well, but just doing shit like this. It's so sick. It's so sick. And I am now way more excited about this new Cursive album than I was previously. Even though I really, really like Cursive, they just put out a lot of albums, and I associate them with a very particular point in time. So it's cool to be like given a reason to be excited about them again. Not a band for everyone, I would say, but if you enjoy a bit of the emo, enjoy a bit of the oversharing in music, then Cursive.
Albums that are, as Open Mike Eagle describes, very emotionally available.
Yeah.
And I guess I'd share with you about what actually went down when we got there. We arrived, we had to sign some variety of non-disclosure agreement where we couldn't talk about too much about our participation until the video actually came out, which is pretty natural. What was funny was, despite being instructed like, hey, can you bring masks or just some kind of dress up, they just had a bunch of shit there. So it was all sorted out that way. And when we actually moved in, Connor got singled out. Tim said to him something to the effect of, hey, love Cuphead, great game, but we can't have a music video. So they got him this giant, like, kind of bobblehead wolf mask that he ended up sliding over his head. And what helped was, since I knew who Katie was, being a relative, because him and I both just stood kind of close to where she was to get us the highest percent chance of actually getting on camera. To kind of get into the plot of the music video, it's sort of this domestic situation going on between this couple, contrasted by a serial killer showing up at a Halloween gig and slashing apart all the band members' throats. And when that serial killer is kind of first identified in the audience, if you're looking on the bottom right-hand corner, that would be me bobbing my head and kind of helping to frame the shot there.
That's awesome.
And shout out again to Katie Casher. I doubt you're ever going to listen to this, but if you do, thank you so much. That was an awesome experience to be a part of.
Hey, one of the dudes from Fucked Up made fun of my Borat impression once, so anything is possible.
That's genuinely, like, I think, a badge of honor. I hope you're like proud of that having happened, Morgan. That's
I would be.
No, fuck that band.
One of the bigger news items of recent weeks is the long-awaited reunion of Oasis. They've finally put the past behind them and agreed to an exorbitant multi-million, like however many figure reunion tour, which is a series of specific dates across Europe, I believe. or is it even just within the UK? I'm actually not sure how far they went with it. But anyway, Oasis are back. And apparently, so I've heard, there may even be a new album coming, which is like, to me, so much more surprising than the fact that they would reunite and do 12 shows. The fact that they would actually have gotten together in a studio and hashed out 10 to 12 songs together is kind of mind-blowing.
You can go out on stage and play songs with your brother who you hate. Getting in a studio to record a record with your brother you hate, there's a considerable distance between these two things.
It actually makes me want to go back and like just deep dive through all the Oasis albums, because I know the first three.
A little bit.
I know the first three very well. We did a video on Be Here Now. If you didn't know, go watch that. It's actually a really great video. I'm very pleased with that video. But you know, I will admit I have that is where my Oasis knowledge, you know, those three albums and the Master Plan, of course, like that's where I get off the Oasis train. Like quite, if you watch the video, you'll know I get off the Oasis train quite strongly with Be Here Now. But now I do want to go back and listen to those subsequent albums, you know, get a little bit of my heathen chemistry on and see, you know, where did they leave things off? Because fuck knows, I haven't heard Dig Out Your Soul. I don't know what that record's like. I want to know if they're going to be picking up from where they left off, or if this new album's just going to be Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds with Liam singing songs.
What I would find even more surprising than a new Oasis album is a new good Oasis album. That would be truly.
I think you're pushing it. You know, I think.
Yeah, it's the fact that I just said that probably means it wouldn't happen.
Look, there's a decent chance that it will be better than both of the Blur post-reunion albums, which were both terribly mid. So
remember when we got super excited for that Blur album and then none of us listened to it?
I listened to it and I liked that one song. I remember being very positive about the first single. But then the rest
first
of it
single's
was,
good.
The rest of it was. So this would very much be like, if they can put out this album and they can get above, you know, this bar of mediocrity that Blur set, there may be some worth in reigniting the Blur versus Oasis debate, possibly.
Yeah, I bet it could get Blur to come back again for like the 5th time.
Oh, if we could reignite the feud too. Oh God, please. You know,
get Oasis playing the Super Bowl.
They look. All I'm saying is they can work it out on the remix. You know,
facts.
It's not outside the realm of possibility. Could you imagine? No, it's not going to happen. What am I saying? An Oasis song featuring Damon Albarn. Could you imagine for a second?
It would be genuinely hysterical.
Or even worse, a Gorillaz song with Liam Gallagher.
A Gorillaz song featuring Oasis would be so fucking funny.
Yeah,
singing some shit about and then the Gallagher's voice just crashes through it.
Anybody fancy some lasagna?
The
fucking biblical man.
I have this weird headcanon that I completely made up that Oasis hate Blur but like Gorillaz, because that's really funny to me. if that were true, like if Noel was like,
have you heard the beats on that thing?
If Noel was just like, you know, Blur
bloody
was
fantastic.
Talking about
Blur was pretentious, you know, upper class nonsense, but Gorillaz, you know, channeling the Happy Monday spirit, bringing Manchester back, bringing in the hip hop stuff. I don't know what this voice is.
I can't believe mine was better than yours.
It's good enough, is what it is.
Bringing in the hip hop stuff, mate. Just
hey, we bringing in the hip hop stuff.
Slowly, you're becoming Trump. Like it's slowly just morphing into it.
Yeah, the hands are really doing Trump, aren't they? I don't know why.
You know, Liam, they're eating the dogs.
That's the issue with
the
kind of post-Trump world we live in, where he has just become this singular fixation of culture, where all things eventually decay into Trump.
He is kind of gay, right? Like that's. I feel like we all know that.
I mean, if it wasn't
Lecter, a great man.
If it wasn't for the everything about him, he'd make an amazing drag race judge.
Yeah. Should we move on then to Kendrick Lamar. We talked about Kendrick Lamar in one of the last videos. Jake and I did this deep dive into Kendrick Lamar. We actually recorded it the very day that Not Like Us dropped.
In a liminal state between the Heart Part 6 and right like minutes after Not Like Us dropped.
Yeah. So that we talked about that then. We don't need to kind of dig into the. I'm actually really proud of that conversation for something that was so impromptu. I feel like we really kind of got a lot of nuances out of it.
We kind of nailed it. Just saying.
But you know, Kendrick anyway just really recently released a new song called "Watch the Party Die," and also this is in conjunction with an announcement that he'll be playing the Super Bowl in February, which is kind of a fucking cracked to me that that's even happening. Like that they would pick him, you know? Like I still can't really believe it. It seems like so much of a PR risk to do that. You know, someone who hasn't historically been super commercially reliable in the way that Super Bowl guests are, but also whose most recent claim to fame and cultural renaissance has been around calling another major superstar a pedophile. Like the fact that they would go with him for that is like I think it's great. I think it's amazing and going to be a really cool cultural event. But it's like kind of fucking wild that it actually happened, that it's going to happen. I kind of almost don't believe it. I'm kind of like, this will happen if it happens. Like I'll see it and then it will be real, but it's not real until that happens. What do you guys think about Kendrick and the Super Bowl?
It is the first halftime show I will watch since. It is the first Super Bowl halftime show that I will watch.
Isn't it? Like, I don't pay attention. I'm not American, obviously. I don't pay attention to these anyway.
What?
I'm lucky if I absorb this stuff. But isn't it just been like my perception of the halftime show in recent years has been like, I know The Weeknd did one, and I'm pretty sure Chris Martin was there for another one, maybe. Or maybe I'm making that up. I don't know.
No, the Weeknd one, you know, because it was one of the only notable performance. Like it's been, I would wager to say 15 years of almost nothing but straight mid. Like, and that's the consensus. Like, I don't think I've seen a single person be like, "Hey, that recent Super Bowl performance at halftime, that was really no." Like,
I remember one was like 6 different rappers. Like 50 Cent hung upside down.
Travis Scott,
for some reason.
I think, was there.
Like, while you look that up, Morgan, can I just say, like, more broadly, what's the deal with the halftime show? Like, why did that become why is that a thing that you stop the football game for a concert? Like,
I don't even necessarily.
I mean, you got to take halftime no matter what. You might as well do something.
Like halftime's kind of an inevitability, and I think that it's just sort of an entertainment thing where it's like they can get sponsorships. Okay. You can like it's all just it's playing the game basically.
It just feels like, no, this is not fair because I know you guys do actually, you're really serious about the football, but it just feels from my perspective like that almost the halftime thing almost matters more than the game.
For anybody who isn't like a diehard, I'm paying attention to every bit of this football game, that's why people watch it. Like they just kind of have the football game on in the background while they're having a party.
Yeah, because
it was Usher this year,
right? I right. You say that, and now I remember that. Yeah, that's kind of weird,
because Usher is relevant.
Yeah, like what's the deal?
He had a new album this year.
No, hey, love Usher. Usher's like, well, she used to fuck with Usher. Usher's great.
And Rihanna was last year, but Rihanna's always relevant.
Yeah.
2022 is Eminem, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Kendrick, and Mary J. Blige.
Oh, featuring was there. Okay.
Featuring 50 Cent and Anderson .Paak. 2021 was The Weeknd. 2020 was grim. 2020 was Shakira and Jennifer Lopez featuring Bad Bunny, J Balvin, and Emmy Muniz. I fully don't know who those last 2 people are.
They're very big, like newer, like reggaeton, like adjacent artists.
Oh God, 2019 was Maroon 5, Travis Scott, and Big Boy.
Yeah, Maroon 5.
Oh yeah,
Mr. Boy. Surely you can.
I think he performed The Way You Move.
You must think more highly of yourself than this, right?
Big Boy, you're deeply underrated presence. Don't sell yourself short like that.
So you see,
who is letting Coldplay perform at the Super Bowl? I don't want any English at my Super Bowl. No.
We left for a reason.
Last bit of news to talk about before we get into some reviews is that Linkin Park have reunited following, of course, the tragic loss of Chester Bennington. It was like 5 years ago.
2017.
Oh God, it was long. Okay, so quite a long time ago. And Linkin Park have reunited. I think one of you might be better equipped to talk about the specifics of the story than me because I can't actually remember the name of the singer in the first place.
Okay.
So why don't Morgan, why don't you get into it because you haven't led a segment yet. So why don't you go off on this?
Yeah. So there was a countdown for like a week before this announcement on Linkin Park's socials and website and all that, and like there was some fucky stuff with the countdown where they had to like restart it for some reason or something. But regardless, it got the energy up, got people paying attention, and once that countdown reached 0, they unveiled a live streamed performance of them on a big old new stage with most of the original members of Linkin Park, minus the drummer and minus the guitarist who did work on the album and help write and play on the album, but will not be going on tour with them. So the people you recognize from Linkin Park were on that stage, and they were joined by Dead Sarah, lead singer Emily Armstrong. If you don't know, and there's really no reason you would, Dead Sarah are a sort of like Southern California based rock band who have made a handful of albums off and on for the last 10-15 years or so. I like them. I really only like them.
I do too.
For the lead singer. The music is not all that interesting, but I would listen to Emily Armstrong read the phone book at me.
They have a great Nirvana cover. Listen to that.
So I was like, they got who? It's just like one of the few fits to me that makes absolute perfect sense for carrying on a new form of Linkin Park without Chester Bennington, which
Agreed.
I mean, I would, if you had asked me like a month ago if I thought that was a good idea, I would have said absolutely not. But now here we are, with a new album entitled From Zero, releasing in November. The first single is out, called The Emptiness Machine. And it's like, I was just like, oh, we're so back. We're the most back. This is none of that One More Light bullshit. Linkin Park is Linkin Park again. Like we're here, and you got Mike Shinoda on the first verse, and then you got Emily on the next verse after the first chorus, and she just hollers when the second chorus comes in, and it's like, God. And it was like I was more emotional than I had expected hearing this band, who I have a relatively minor attachment to, come back, because I truly had not thought it possible that they would come back. And so the single's out, they played the show. Everybody has their opinions, there's just scrolling on Instagram comments and whatnot. It seems a pretty much equal divide of people being like, no, should have made a new band. It's not Linkin Park. And people who are like, no, this kicks ass. So there's that. And then not but a few days later, it comes out that Miss Armstrong has ties to the Church of Scientology. And worse yet, was a known defender of that 70s show rape man, Danny Masterson.
Shouldn't laugh.
This is certainly
probably the news come out. Does Emily Armstrong defend rape? And she has made a post on the Instagrams and the whatnots that's like, hey, I got sort of roped into defending this person. I thought they were innocent. They are clearly not, which is like, you know, we all sort of fuck up, you know. We have all trusted people and been friends with people that we should not have been friends with or trusted. Very human error to make. Just not a word about the Scientology in that statement. It's not a word
Pointedly.
about the you know, the culture of, you know, the fact that Scientology is more or less a criminal organization in many ways. There are rumors that like her parents work for like the highest up offices of Scientology or whatever. I have no idea if any of that's true. Nobody knows if she's still a Scientologist or if she ever even was, really, except for Cedric Bixler Zavala and his wife.
For those of you who are unaware of the situation, one of the people one of the victims of Danny Masterson was in fact the wife of Cedric Bixler Zavala of the Mars Volta, which is why it's like, I know it sounds like Morgan and I just like crashed a Mars Volta shaped car into this conversation, but trust me, no, that is how it felt to read.
It raises a lot of questions about, you know, Linkin Park's vetting process, or what they believe or what they are okay with, how sort of insulting it is to the memory of Chester that uh, they have chosen someone who very likely believe that psychiatry and psychology is bullshit. And you know what distresses me personally the most about all of this is that I don't really care. Like I just the song is so good.
Well, here's my take on this, right? Which is that obviously a really unpleasant situation that, you know, would be great if it hadn't happened. And
Yeah,
there just needs to be some level of accountability, but also, you know, we're of the same culture that, you know, is happy to continually dudes rock Tom Cruise all the time.
Mhm.
You know, who
yeah.
is buddies with Ron Miscavige, and you know, it's like, where do you draw the line? Is it, and do you even have an obligation to draw the line? Are you actually acting in a
Can you
way?
draw a line in this
Are you
situation?
Yeah, I
actually
mean,
acting in a way where your behavior is enabling this? And if not, then, you know, I don't think that enjoying the new Linkin Park song and being excited for a new Linkin Park record is enabling any of this stuff.
yeah,
There's
I
maybe a
mean, just
conversation to
just
be had about, you know, going to their shows and giving them money and whatever. I don't know. I don't really enjoy those conversations because they tend to end up quite circular. But it is interesting to see this utter, like, light speed milkshake ducking happen in real time,
God, right?
to one of the, you know, biggest and most beloved bands of the last 25 years.
I feel if we really want, we can dig through a lot of the treasure troves of, you know, great artists, John Lennon, whomever we want to, and point to their personal flaws. And not that Linkin Park are the Beatles, but more to my point,
they're better, yes.
in any kind of parasocial relationship with art, you just, there's sort of a point where you have to accept, okay, maybe this person may not be the most morally upstanding, righteous person that I would want them to be for my own standard of living. And I think it's ultimately an individual choice of what you are going to do with this information. And that being said, you know, love the Mars Volta, one of the greatest bands ever, one of my favorite bands ever. And I like Linkin Park. I'm still probably going to listen to this new album just because I'm hooked in enough of a sense of I want to know what it's going to be like. But as the point was made earlier, I think it's just up to you individually how you are going to go about this. If you feel it crosses a line for you where you don't want to listen to their music because of this, I think that's a perfectly acceptable response to the
Totally.
situation too.
The thing that bothers me about this specifically is just that what I think Linkin Park owes their fans isn't like anything musical, or isn't, it doesn't have anything to do with who they hire. it has to do with transparency. If it's what August said, it comes down to an individual choice that one consumer wants to be able to make, but you need to provide the consumer with enough details for them to be able to make that choice. Because if they're not comfortable with consuming that music and they don't want to listen to that, if they think it's disrespectful, if they're not whatever, if they decide to draw that line, no matter how hypocritical or whatever it may be, they deserve to be able to draw that line. And with Emily Armstrong being very hush hush about Scientology, I feel like the negative response is a bit overblown, but there is a kernel of legitimate, valid criticism. But like, just there's a lot of strong feelings about this right now, and I understand a lot of them. But as we four like invested enough to pay attention, but not really invested enough to care, I'm just sort of seeing how it all plays out, I guess.
What's I think going to be interesting is to see how the addition of Emily Armstrong kind of affects the identity of Linkin Park musically going forward. I'm really interested to hear this new album. And again, like with Oasis, this is actually going to make me go back and listen to every previous Linkin Park album so I can be, completely up to date. Because I definitely want us to review this when it comes out. And then at that point, when we hear the album, I think it'll be a good chance to have a conversation about where Linkin Park fall in this canon of bands who have at some point, replaced the front person. Because I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had about bands that have done that in the past and the varying levels of success that have come out of that as well. Jake, you've talked about this a little bit with Black Sabbath in the past.
Yeah.
So, I think we'll be able
that'll be a good now topic one day.
Yeah, we'll be able to have an interesting conversation about it then, I think. And that angle to me, like less about who Emily Armstrong is as a person and more about how her addition to the band changes the dynamic, changes the tone, changes the music, is going to be an interesting conversation to have. We'll be able to reflect on band identity and how band identity shifts and changes when key members leave or die or whatever happens. So that I think will be a cool conversation to have. But maybe we should wait for the album and for all this noise to subside a little bit before we can really peel into that. Alrighty, let's do some album reviews. Let's talk about some recent albums because that's the thing we do on the Jams and Tea podcast. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds is one of the bands that we love the most on this show. It's a band that we love dearly. Morgan has a great video where he ranked their entire discography as well. Back in 2021, we reviewed, well, that wasn't a Bad Seeds album, but in 2021 we reviewed the last Nick Cave solo album, I guess, with Warren Ellis. Nick Cave and Warren Ellis are basically Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, minus a couple other members anyway. So the distinctions are kind of fluid. But we did review the last Nick Cave album in 2021, Carnage, which was a great album. We reviewed it very positively. I think that album still has held up really, really well. But for all intents and purposes, as it regards to Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, this new album, Wild God, is the follow-up to 2019's Ghosteen. Another album that has had a video made on it on this channel before as well that we've dug into. We all love Nick Cave dearly as well. I want to throw it to you, Morgan, because Morgan, just to me, you are the Nick Cave scholar of the four of us. I want to hear from you about kind of expectations leading into Nick Cave, because it felt a little bit like Skeleton Tree and Ghosteen were kind of like, they were obviously deeply personal records and they were kind of tying a bow around a particular era of Nick Cave that kind of came about in the 2010s, coinciding with a lot of the tragedy in his life, of course. So I want to hear what your feelings were, anticipation for a new Nick Cave album, what you were kind of hoping for, and of course what we got and how it's landed for you.
To me, it's that moment in Nick Cave's career of Skeleton Tree and Ghosteen is also bookended by Carnage, and a lot of this feeling comes from it not just being sonically in much the same vein as those previous two albums, but also in the fact that songs from those albums are all performed in the Andrew Dominic documentary concert film, This Much I Know to Be True, which, if you're a fan of Nick Cave, is an absolute must-see.
Fantastic film. Yeah.
So if the fact that it was a return to the Bad Seeds, the fact that it had been some time since we sort of left off on the note that Carnage left us off on, I was mostly just curious, I was eager to see if this had a bit more of a traditional Bad Seeds sound, as much as any such thing exists. I was curious to see how much he was going to be sort of discussing grief and the state of the world as he sees it again, through very much through the lens of grief. And I would say that it is sort of more of a harkening back to the more traditional Bad Seed sound with Wild God. I would say that it is the world through the eyes of Nick Cave living life after the death of two of his sons now.
Mm.
But it's not as simple as either of those things either. Thematically, this album can be absolutely resplendent with joy, which if you've heard those last three albums is a palette swap.
He actually
It's a
wanted
bit
to call the album Joy. That was the initial title that they were going to run with. And
Hmm.
they changed it to Wild God. Um, so that sort of tells you how much that was part of the mission statement going into this.
it is about joy. It embraces that joy sonically, spiritually, lyrically, but it is also, you know, it is not a Beach Boys album, you know. There are moments of quiet solitude and sort of spiritual mourning on the album in moments that I think are still here and still fit on the album perfectly without making it feel disjointed sonically or thematically, because it feels to me like Nick Cave has gotten to the point in his life where he understands what it is to be happy and content with life, but that had to come with the tragedies that
Mm.
he's endured.
He talked about
Um,
this beautifully on Colbert recently. There's a fantastic
yeah.
Yes.
interview he did with Colbert, and this was kind of like that was kind of the thesis statement of it, of the interview, and I think also of the album itself, which is that joy, that the feeling of joy over that of an ecstatic high can't exist without suffering, and in a lot of ways is like kind of an earned product of suffering. And that's kind of I think how Nick envisions his grief with this album as having kind of crystallized into this feeling of joy that's a product of having worked through that suffering. Um, and like for me, nowhere is that more crystallized than on the song Joy, which has come to be my favorite on the album, actually. It's astonishingly beautiful. I walked across the campus that I work at with the week this album came out and just in a total daze listening to this. It's a beautiful song. He chronicles waking up in the night, being visited by the phantom of his son, essentially basically calling for him to embrace joy and to leave the darkness behind. And it's, Nick is such a talent for distilling a simple idea about joy in a way that doesn't feel like a platitude, but also does embrace a lot of the traditions of expressing those feelings that have come through from, soul music and in different forms of music, 20th century music specifically. And this album embraces a lot of those aesthetics and a lot of those sounds as templates as well. Big choirs, massive gospel choirs. Uh, Absolutely like I can't tell you the feeling I had listening to the song Conversion for the first time. When he has those choirs that come in halfway through, touched by the Spirit, touched by the flame. That to me is like the kind of defining aspect of this album is the way that human voices are kind of coming together to create this large sound that is about kind of communicating joy, not just as a kind of passive emotional thing, but as something that is earned. That's, I think, the heart of what this album is.
it acknowledges joy as not a state of being. Sort of, it's almost like a body of work, that you have to add to. And you take
Oh,
these moments in your life and you don't always know them when you're in them, but eventually enough of them add up, if you're lucky, that you can look around at go then and go, things are okay, I'm content with things right now. And sometimes that realization in and of itself is the cause of joy. And it's reflected, this is again, unsurprisingly, a deeply spiritual sounding album. A lot of it sounds like if worship music was good. Um, I was at my grandfather's funeral last week, and they played a hymn called "It Is Well with My Soul," and I swear to God, this thing must have been 8 minutes long. I was standing there for so long, and I was like, surely we can edit these verses down some, right? But my grandmother and great grandmother were in the pew right in front of me and doing the harmonies, so maybe that's a moment that they had to have, and that's fine. But I was also like, man, the beat is whack on this thing. But anyways, there's a real earned musicianship of a band as storied as the Bad Seeds, doing things on here that can only come with being that storied, I think, to actually pull off. It's like sonically ambitious, but also in a way that just feels like them, really inherently. That's sort of completely ethereal and hard to describe, but you know it exactly when you hear it, and you hear it from pretty much moment one on Song of the Lake, which is one of the absolute highlights for me of this
Really?
particular record. So sonically, I was actually somewhat reassured to find that this was a little more Bad Seedsy than the last two Bad Seeds albums. It felt not just because, I wanted to change sonically, but also because, it meant that Nick's life had still changed some, that he wasn't in the same place that he was when he was writing both of those albums. And I find that to be really reassuring. And really ultimately this album I think speaks to the human spirit, as big and empty as that sounds, but I mean it's there, and that's why Nick Cave is one of the great artists of our time and of the late 20th century, is that he can genuinely sit down and speak to that,
I,
and
I,
you don't go, well, that's hollow and meaningless.
I'm glad you mentioned it feeling like a conscious sort of return to a more traditional band seed sound, while also obviously developing in its own way because the presence of those vocals are so distinct and so new. I thought a lot of the Lyre of Orpheus, like
Mm.
specifically
I did as well.
that second disc of that double album, because that is kind of the closest predecessor to this, I think. Has one of my favorite Nick Cave songs ever, which is "Oh Children," which I thought of multiple times while listening to
Yep.
this. Um, and then even in some of the more pared back, quiet songs, like one of the most underrated songs in this for me is "Long Dark Night," which reminded me of Boatman's Call of all things.
Yep.
Which was a really nice sort of surprise, I suppose. It does feel a little bit at times like a bit of a mixed bag. There are certain moments that grab me a little bit more immediately than others. And I do question mildly the decision to get Fridman to mix this. Can at certain parts make it feel a little bit. Actually, this isn't really a huge deal for most of the album, but there are certain songs where Fridman's touch, I think, pushes the mix a little bit too far for what's trying to be captured. Actually, I suppose that's more the first two songs. I don't quite love the title track as much as I was hoping to. I
That's
there,
actually probably my least favorite as well, weirdly
there's
enough.
It's
it's like
definitely lower on the rung.
it's like the only point on the album where it feels like this hugeness that Nick's going for, especially with the way that the vocals come in on that kind of bring your spirit down part. It just
Mhm.
feels a little bit too uh it doesn't quite have the feel and the scope and the scale that I think it's going for. It doesn't quite reach that. And I think that's an engineering thing. But those are kind of boring things to complain about. But the album really like I struggled with this album the first time I heard it, mainly because of those first two songs. I think the first song was great. I just have a few bits of I just find the way that it's mixed a little bit irritating, but the song itself is amazing. And then the second song just threw me a little bit. But Frogs, this song
Fire.
is like,
This is the girl.
this is like,
Where it is at.
yeah. I've spoken enough. Jake, August, I want to hear from you guys at this point. What are your sort of takes on this album, the things that stand out, your feelings on what Nick's doing here?
I will be brief. I like this album. I don't share the same enthusiasm for it you all do necessarily. And I suppose that's just a thing where even though I did really love how Carnage sound, I found sonically this struck a bit more of a Ghosteen chord for me, where it's a nice sounding well done album that I'm just really not too into the music on it. I think and that's not to say it's bad. Wild God, it's an album that doesn't ever like fully strike me as being my thing. While I can really appreciate songs like Frogs, I love the opener here, and I also really like Conversion later on. I think those are three highlights that if nothing else you can take away from this album, you can't take away from this album. But I do find sometimes the more gospely, orchestral influences on this album lead it into territory that ends up feeling a bit too meandering for my liking, where I just find these the washes of this grand kind of opulent sound it's going for don't really hit home for me in necessarily the way I really want them to. And I think Wild God, as you mentioned earlier, Riley, is not even a bad example of that, where that is a song I find just a little left-footed in its construction, how it all fits together. And I suppose that's really where I come down on the album, is it's a lot of nice, good songs that don't necessarily do a ton for me. I do also feel by the time we're past Conversion, once we're to a song like Cinnamon Horses, which I find to be just flat out the weakest piece on
I agree.
here. And oh man, then you go into oh wow, and As the Waters Cover the Sea, which I just didn't really feel the sting of that as a closer that I was kind of hoping for. It's an album with a really nice first half. I just can't help but find it lands a little bit for me.
I think it's interesting that Nick Cave's most overtly gospel-inspired album is also the one where I find his lyricism to be the most preoccupied with the demystification of the spiritual. It's almost like that when Nick is on here talking about, it's like on Song of the Lake when he's about to go on off these very lyrical tangents and then interrupts himself and then goes, "Oh, never mind, never mind." I love that songwriting choice, by the way, because it deliberately wrong foots you like immediately and really kind of locks me into what the experience is going to be like. And while doing that, it strikes me as an attempt to do away with the prose, to do away with dressing up the spiritual with how it's traditionally interpreted and dissected. The interesting thing about Nick is that he has this secular form of spiritualism that takes from different mythologies and religions into one kind of humanist ball. And that's kind of what I find at the core of Wild God, is that to me, it's not only in the instrumentals that the gospel influences show up on, which I really appreciated. I'm somebody who really likes Southern soul and gospel music. So like I've actually been listening to a lot of Aretha Franklin recently. So like sliding into this was a surprisingly easy task for me. Not only because I agree with my co-hosts in that I was very ready for a new Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds album to be a more muscular Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds album. Because while I love Ghosteen and Skeleton Tree, two of my favorite Nick Cave albums and two of my favorite albums in general, uh, they were ethereal, they were moody, they were more about soundscapes than rigid song structures or just, the original punk blues you might go to Nick Cave for. And while this isn't, hard-edged and razor sharp or even particularly post-punky, it still has a lot of muscular instrumentation that I feel is very satisfying. And with Warren Ellis's production touches, I do feel like it blends into a sound that is a bit amorphous at times, but to me is always captivating. I'm no less lost in this album than I have been with his last couple of records, Carnage included. But I love the way that Nick sounds like a preacher on this album. Like in the sense that he does feel like he is relaying a message, interpreting the word of what he views to be God to an audience. It feels like he is directly addressing the listener almost more than he ever has on an album like this. And when he's going into, traditional Nick Cave storytelling songs like Wild God, it feels a little bit less, I don't know, mythologized than some of his other work. It's dressing these things down to interrogate them for what they are and to appreciate them for what they are, which is what I find so refreshing about it. It's Nick saying, I've gone through the ringer these past couple of years. I've lost a lot. A lot of my art has been about that. And now I've come out on the other side, but this is still a part of me. It's why things like Grief are still embedded into this album in places, but it's not an album that's preoccupied with it to the point where it subsumes it. And I feel like that makes the listening experience a little bit more like straightforwardly engaging than maybe his last couple of things have been. Like, I agree that Wild God is actually one of the weaker tracks on here, though I do still enjoy it. But like Song of the Lake, I think is a great opener. Frogs, Joy, amazing. Final Rescue Attempt kind of feels like Nick's attempt at sort of addressing the world as it was, kind of like he did on Carnage a couple of times. There's just a lot of lyricism here that feels very pointedly relevant about the way that society views religion, the way that society views gods, the way that we dress them up and just sort of use gods and religions as an avenue for our already sort of human tendencies, and then kind of bake that into its identity to where it contorts. He says that, like, in 100 years when everybody is dead, where are your gods? Like, where are they now? Everything is nothing but stone. It's an album that is focused on the material reality and deriving joy from that material reality, even if on songs like Wild God it means at the expense of your own sanity. The rape and the pillage and the retirement village is one of the most quintessentially Nick Cave lines that has simply ever been written. Like, I heard that, and I was like, yeah, we're back, baby. We've never been more back.
Like I said in the group chat the other day, it's not even a Nick Cave song or Nick Cave album if at some point you don't look at your phone and go, wait, what did he say?
Yeah.
Similar moment in Oh Wow Oh Wow, How Wonderful She Is, which seems to be getting the brunt of most of the negative attention on this album.
I love that song. I love that song.
I love this song. Like, auto-tune and all, I think all of the choices here work within the aesthetic of the album, and I also just plainly love him. Well, first of all, I believe the song is actually is it this song that's a tribute to a former musician that you worked with?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got a very sweet voice message from her at the very end where she's talking about things in a very Nick Cavey kind of way that feels very, you can tell that this really touched him, and that this part of it helped inspire to, make a piece of art that incorporated this particular message into it. And I really like that. I will say I do agree with August in that I do think that Cinnamon Horses is a moment where it's really more that, like, there are moments on this album where Nick is less writing and more rambling, and that's fine. I love Nick Cave's ramblings, but like sometimes they can be singularly captivating in a stream of consciousness kind of way, and sometimes they can just kind of, sometimes they're just a little bit too long and it's hard to decipher meaning out of them. And Cinnamon Horses, I do kind of feel like is the latter. It's just I don't know where the lyricism of this song fits into the greater context of the album. I'm not denying that it couldn't have a greater purpose. I just don't know what it is right now, because that's the kind of writer that Nick is. But still, the one thing I want to pay special attention to is the song Conversion, which is my favorite song on the album. And to me, it's like it's like Nick Cave is narrating his own baptism by fire. It is so beautiful. Like, it is exactly the kind of thing when it's like, I want the big grand operatic piece of gospel music from Nick Cave. This is that. It does. I think that it's less consistent than his overall efforts have been in recent years, just because there are moments where it leans on the lightness of the instrumentation or the rambliness of his songwriting. But I'm no less enthralled by Nick's words and by Nick's music than I was the last 4 or 5 fucking albums at this point.
This is easy album of the year so far for me, which, you know, I've heard 22 albums this year and 15 of them were boring. So
Yep.
This is
take that for what it's worth. But it feels it I have finally confidently arrived at something that's an obvious contender.
moving on. One of the albums that I would say has generated the most buzz and attention in online musical spaces this year has been the new sophomore effort from a band called Magdalena Bay. We reviewed this band's debut album in 2021, I want to say. I think it was 2021. Positive review. We enjoyed the band. I think we weren't quite as in love with them as maybe a lot of people were. It's kind of hard to like even know where to approach this band because they're so beloved online, but also like if you step outside of the bubble in which they're beloved, like still most people don't know who they are. They haven't really had like a crossover mainstream moment. They're just like intensely incredibly popular within a very insular world, a very mercurial world, one might say. So
But you wouldn't though, would you?
I remember the kind of the main thrust of our feelings when we reviewed that first album being, this is really, really good. Some really great songs on there. I still think the song Secrets is like an amazing song that I come back to quite regularly, really, really catchy. But it was this feeling of like, this band are really, really good. We're glad that people love them, but we haven't quite had the moment that we want to have with them yet. And also there was this feeling I remember having of this band have a much better album in them, like a much more complete album in them, I think, that I hadn't quite realized yet. And then Imaginal disc, I can't quite figure out how to say that title. Every single time I say it, it feels wrong.
Imaginal.
Yeah, I almost want to say it.
It's too close to vaginal, frankly.
Yeah, thank you for saying that because I was like dancing around it. Yeah, it does sound a little bit like. So with this new album,
Imaginal.
yeah, that's no word of a lie. That is how my head has been saying it for weeks now. This album was preceded by some pretty big singles, and I have to say that I completely slept through all of them. I didn't listen to any of them, and I deeply regret that because the singles for this album have been universally fantastic. They led off this album rollout with Death and Romance, which I think is one of the best pop songs of the decade. Like the moment those massive radiant piano chords come in, those huge drums, that's the swelling kind of zipper synths. I absolutely adore this song. This song is incredible to me. And they followed it up with Image, which is like a really funky song that has a real kind of swagger and groove to it. And this like weird theremin sound instrument. I'm not sure if it's a theremin, but it sounds great. And so again, I can't say like, oh, I heard these and I had this feeling because I missed all of this completely. And I'm catching up very much with the hype already here. And so what's really struck me about this most of all is how massive the sound is. Like even relative to Mercurial World, which did have this like huge sort of which had this kind of like clear budget behind it, this clear clarity and really colorful mixes. I was not expecting something so blockbuster sounding. Because the thing with Magdalena Bay is I kind of have this association of them with like, not with vaporwave necessarily, but with like kind of lo-fi sort of online aesthetic. Like not that their music sounds like that, but a lot of the aesthetics that they kind of work and fit in with this kind of like nostalgics for the 90s sort of like lo-fi sort of this particular aesthetic. And then you listen to their music and it sounds big budget, it sounds huge, it has a lot of clarity, it has a lot of space, it has a lot of color. And the biggest thing that struck me about this album, I've already kind of alluded to it with one song, is it has a lot of groove to it. There is bass up the wazoo on this album, and it sounds fantastic. It has this real kind of muscular, deep seated groove element to it that's at the heart of a lot of these songs. In a lot of ways, Magdalena Bay kind of remind me of Carly Rae Jepsen. I couldn't help but think of her a lot while listening to this album. The way that she's kind of evolved her sound from Emotion, but specifically in more recent years with the last couple of albums that she's done. The last album she put out was one of my favorite pop albums of the decade so far, to be honest. And the way that both of these artists have kind of embraced a very kind of backward looking sort of, colorful 90s vision of pop, turn of the century sort of vision of pop that has so much character and so much kind of, sort of spunky charisma to it, makes it feel like really attractive and really, really enjoyable. I'm not in love with every song on this album. I do think that the midsection of it, the songs Fear, Sex, Vampire in the Corner, and Watching TV don't quite grab me as much as I would like. But apart from that, this thing has consistently grown on me the more time that I've spent with it. And it's, it's interesting and colorful and surprising in a lot of ways. I am really impressed with what an event album this actually sounds like, as well as, beyond the hype. To actually put this on, you do get a sense of a band who are like really trying to make their classic. And, it seems like that it's been received with a lot of enthusiasm. What do you guys think?
I remember the other day that I sent in one of the headlining Sputnik music reviews of this album that said something about this being a really online album, or something. There's like music for really I think it was music for terminally online people or something. And I was like, that's the most damning thing you can say about an album. And I wouldn't say it's accurate really at all. What I would say is that it is an unbelievably 2024 album. There is no other time that this album could have come from, despite its obvious influences, because so many of those influences are current. There's like some hyperpop influences here on the production, just on the sound of it, how blown out these vocals are, really just how blown out the album is in general in terms of the production. And a lot of that for me is like, it keeps me at an arm's distance from it. And it is mostly because it makes me feel really old. That is both a compliment to it, because it feels like it is it is an important stepping stone of its time. It's the thing that gets the people going right now, and that's a great thing. And it's totally easy to see why when you listen to it, because so much of it sounds so good and is so well done and is so mercurial and captivating. But it's also, the the time is slipping through my hands, through my fingers like grains of sand. I get older every single day, and soon I will be dead. Soon, probably like 50 more years, maybe, if I'm lucky. But like, in the grand scope of things, that's soon. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, the album. This is just sort of the feeling I get from it. Complete disconnect, but there's so much about it that's like, yes, this is the thing. And it makes sense that it's the thing, and it's great that it's the thing,
There's like an interesting quality to nostalgia in pop music now, I think. Because I like your statement that this could have only come out in 2024, I think is really, really interesting, because it feels like the more that pop music looks backwards, weirdly and in a kind of totally paradoxical way, the newer it sounds, because you have so much more of a massive influences to pull from, that it becomes less like it sounds like this specific era of pop music or this specific band, and more like a whole history as being like completely canvassed into a new sound. Because I thought of pop stars from the 80s. I thought of Britney Spears while listening to this. Sorry, I just say 80s. I thought of pop stars from the 2000s. I thought of Britney Spears while listening to this. I thought of Red Hot Chili Peppers from the 90s and like rock bands that put a real funk emphasis in the music. I thought of loads of pop stars from the 80s. There's a little bit of even Kate Bush and affectations in the singer's voice. And most, like, the best part of all is I thought of like 70s pop while listening to this. Specifically, I just want to take a moment here to talk about what is my second favorite song of the year, certainly my favorite pop song of the year, one of the most baller songs of the last several years, Cry For Me. This is ABBA's Dancing Queen for the 21st century. It sounds like ABBA and ELO at the same time. It has ELO strings and ABBA vocals. And it just like rises and builds and like crests with this incredible climax. I will say the initial limitation I had with this band, like with this album, that the one thing that weirdly enough stuck in my craw was there was something about the way the singer, and this is initially, but there was initially something about the way the singer sings, I think just kind of how breathy she can be, that really turned me off initially. But I have to give her credit. Mika Tenenbaum is her name. I have to give her credit because she takes that style she has and she goes in so many different directions with it, and she gets so much character out of those performances. That thing that to me on the first album felt like an annoying affectation in the way she sings that held me at a distance, here is like a quality of her character that I think is explored in different ways in this album. So yeah, I really, really love that.
It feels like they are really putting their sound together, and I thought this was way better than their last album. Definitely a solid step in the right direction in terms of, yeah, just the vocals getting better, the expanding of their sound. And gosh, I really love just some of the longer, more epic moments on here. Like the kind of it's, you know, presented to be a duology, but Death and Romance into Fear Sex, I love that just massive 8-minute kind of wall of synths. It's a very pretty standout moment on the record for me. I can't say I'm like yet still the biggest Magdalena Bay fan, but this is a step towards making me one in a lot of the right directions, and I definitely will be listening to this a few more times to really get a kind of more concrete thoughts on it. But good record.
Nice.
I mean, there's a lot to be said for like how, I say it's definitely a product of its time, but it's also completely singular to this band in its own way. There's a lot to be said for finding your voice so early.
Oh yeah, and no, in particular though, I wanted to shout out just like the clear and obvious like Prince influence over this whole album.
Oh, yes. Good shout.
I was, oh my gosh, I was thinking of some of the best moments on Purple Rain during some of the really just pretty kind of funky part. Oh, nice album.
There's definitely a song that has like a guitar solo or like a synth solo melded to sound like a guitar solo that reminded me of Prince. And for the life of me, I can't actually remember what song it is. But yeah, no, there's so much just texture in this. That's easy to turn into a buzzword, but it really is true for this album, is there's just texture up the wazoo. And as someone who like really values records that in this vein that kind of go for a kind of overstimulation feeling that give you all these different kind of textures to kind of soak in, I really, really appreciate that. One of my favorite songs that I haven't mentioned is That's My Floor, which has like, it's just a miasma of texture. It has like this snaking bassy guitar line that sounds like a creature snarling. And I just adore that. It's like there was nothing up to the point of the album that sounded like that. So yeah, loads of stuff that I love here. I could pick and choose moments all day. Okay, then let's go into the last album that we have to review today. MJ Lenderman. That's, I believe, Mark Jacob Lenderman, but his friends call him Jake.
Jacob Lenderman. I don't know if that's true. I'm just making that up, but
yeah. Who else is MJ, but not Michael Jackson.
Michael Jordan.
Who he has written a song about. Hangover Game. Real ones
There
know.
you go. Hell
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, MJ Lenderman. If you don't know who this is, I was going to say he's the guitarist in Wednesday, but if you don't know who MJ Lenderman is, you probably don't know who Wednesday are either. I'm going to try as much as possible to, like, I'm not going to say I'll be objective here or distance, because the whole point of this is we talk about our feelings, but I'll try and not be the world's biggest dick writer for 10 minutes and just sort of take a step back from and approach this album, because this is my album of the year.
And then you can take the following 10 minutes to ride the dick furiously.
Yeah. This is me like posturing like I'm going to be normal and I'm not.
Of course. Look, it's about the aesthetic of appearing normal rather than the practical reality of it.
But but normal for me is
True.
being a anyway. This is my favorite album of the year. It was Cindy Lee's Diamond Jubilee, and now it is this. But what is that even? That's not useful. That's not criticism. That's not useful information. MJ Lenderman, the guitarist of the indie rock band Wednesday, we reviewed their album Rat Saw God last year. That was one of my favorite albums of that year as well. But even prior to that, MJ Lenderman as a solo artist was making waves with his 2022 album Boat Songs, an album which I know, August, you and I are both fans of. And that was kind of a moment, discovering that album at the respective points in which we did was a moment where we were like, damn, this guy's really, really cool. I want to throw to you, August, to kind of talk about this first and give whatever context you want to give, or whatever, feelings you want to talk about in terms of how you feel about this artist and this album specifically. You can lead us into this if you want. What are your feelings on MJ Lenderman and Manning Fireworks?
As it happens, this is also my favorite album of the year thus far. So this is an album that is coming out, I believe, 2 years after Boat Songs. And perhaps the most notable thing about Lenderman's career thus far has just been kind of the meteoric rise of it, how in the span of his earlier kind of demo recordings and then joining Wednesday as their lead guitarist, Lenderman has made a name for himself within his particular niche, just for being, I think, a voice. He sounds like a type of artist we have not had in a long time. Lenderman has this phenomenal ability to capture this really fundamentally American sense of disenfranchisement, melancholia, dealing with the ho-hum of one's life, while also writing from the perspective of a at times just completely self-deprecating, down on himself loser. And you know what? That's something kind of fun. What I was really thinking about this album as I was listening to it is like, my God, this is the modern day Warren Zevon right here. This is a man who is able to translate these stories of self-pity, self-wallowing into something that is so genuinely impactful, but also funny, humorous. And that's a quality that, for as much as this album can be generally a little down on itself, it's fucking hilarious. Let's make that point clear. There are so many funny lines. One that always stands out to me is you've got on Rudolph, where there's the line about Lightning McQueen driving blackout at full speed, or other lines on Joker Lips cleaning come out of the showers just to make the hours pass a little faster. Things that are on their face, these like grim representations of misery, but it translated in such a pointed, humorous way that it clicks with you immediately, while also having a very tangible kind of country Americana influence, but never straying too far away from that kind of indie rock sound. I was reminded a lot of Built to Spill on this album with the tone of the guitar, and that's something that needs to be said right off the bat. For as great as MJ Lenderman's playing is, and it's fantastic, it is elevated to the umpteenth degree by the crispness of the mix here. Oh man, just and yeah, I will try to avoid the complete flagellation and dick riding here. But I think I'm kind of past that point. I love how throughout this whole album there are constant allusions to, and in a funny way, it's great we reviewed this with the new Nick Cave, because these are both albums that approach ideas of spirituality in the modern world and the void it is meant to or meant not to fill. Some of this, though, is tinted through Lenderman's American upbringing and living in this country, hence why it doesn't quite go into the full weirdo, Nick Cave stuff. But that's, I guess, just sort of how I wanted to kick this. That's sort of my introduction for this album, and I'll let you guys dig into it a bit more.
One of my favorite lyrics on the album, and to me, one of the most representative of exactly what you were just saying, is I wouldn't be in the seminary if I could be with you. That to me distills so much of the, not that I claim to have a relationship to the American experience, but as we've talked about before on the show, that a particular kind of American experience that's very familiar to a lot of you is also very analogous to the experiences I had growing up. Very sort of, heavily religious and conservative, spaces. And that line just really, really struck a chord with me. I won't get too into it at the moment because I want to save the bulk of my thoughts for last, because otherwise I'll just steal all the material. But I will just say, in terms of MJ Lenderman's appeal, to build on what you were saying, August, the thing about the way he writes, and this fits in with the Zevon comparison as well, is that he's able to create these portraits of characters. They're not necessarily story songs, although they sometimes can be. And Wednesday do a similar thing, for what it's worth. Carly Hartzman writes in a not dissimilar way. But MJ Lenderman is able to craft these portraits of lonely, isolated men who are varying degrees of sympathetic, who sometimes on certain tracks on this album can be downright ugly in certain ways, and so blinded to their toxicity that they have no way of perceiving how they're enabling their own spiral. And he's able to paint these portraits with such poetic acuity that you feel and see yourself inside all of them, in all degrees of it. And poetic acuity is what I mean by that is that he's economical as a songwriter. He doesn't write long songs. He doesn't write a lot of lyrics. Most of these songs have maybe 12 to 18 lines.
And if we're not counting the final 6 minutes of the last track, this is only a 33-minute long album. So it's ridiculously punchy.
Yeah.
Which is always a quality I can respect when someone is able to be it's the classic Shakespeare line, brevity is the soul of wit.
He does one of the best things I think a songwriter can do, which is make every line matter. And what I mean by that is that if you take away a certain lyric, just one lyric, the whole thing feels incomplete. And that's not something that every songwriter can do. It's not, and I should say it's not something you have to do to be a good songwriter. But the kinds of songwriters who can do that, who can make every line matter, and just completely excise anything that would be superfluous to that, or making a point that's already been made. It's a talent that very few songwriters working today have, and he really has it. And the fact that that's only half of the picture, when the other half is what an utterly prodigious guitarist he is, not just in the sense that he can play the guitar well, but he has unique tones that he comes up with, colorful sounding solos, different ways of using effects pedals to create contrast and keep things varied. He is in every way a guitarist can be creative, at least from my perspective anyway. He does so many really, really ingenious things, I would say.
I would call the approach utilitarian because that's the word that I came away with when I listened to this the last time. And the first time I listened to this, I was like, this is a really good all-rounder album. It's tight. It doesn't have any large identifiable weaknesses. It hits every box that I personally want from an album like this. Coming back to it though, God, this thing really grows on you. I have to say, there's not to lean too much on the point that we're trying to make about the writing here, but there is this trend that I see specifically with those like late millennial kind of early Zoomer songwriters these days, where they speak in these pure abstractions that are always a little bit like purposefully clumsy, ironic, but there is an emotional truth inside all of them. And MJ Lenderman does this about as well as anybody does, frankly. I think of people like the person I was most often reminded of songwriting wise was actually like Phoebe Bridgers, and that they both rely on like symbols to overcast some parts of their lyrics that have this sort of lingering, as I put it earlier, ennui that's very quintessentially modern, even though their music feels kind of out of time. And man, this album sounds fucking incredible. Like I think about there's a really compressed drum fill at the start of one of the songs on the first half that's just like blah, 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 blah. And it sounds fuck ugly. I love it. And immediately afterwards, you get this like this whole album kind of sounds fried, like not in a bad way, but just in a way where every instrumental choice feels purposefully broken in a way that adds to the character of the album. And it kind of adds to the character of the songwriting in fits and starts, so much so that every song on here becomes highly memorable for its own reasons. That economy that Riley mentioned is so key because it also keeps from what could be a very standard kind of slacker rock inclined album to being this thing that's imbued with such artistic singularity. And like there's moments on here that I just think really explain why MJ Lenderman has really met the moment as a guy, you know, a guitar guy, even for this relatively small success that he's been met. This is just not like a thing that really happens all that much anymore. Somebody like him getting this popular. So A, we should cherish it while we get it, and B, appreciate the details that he gives us. And there's details like the catchiness of some of the hooks here. This really sort of explains to me why he's catching on, because you have a song like, I think my favorite song on here, which is really tough because there's there's three songs on here that are just like unbelievably good. The first of which is Wristwatch. I think this is my favorite right now. The songwriting conceit of him coming back to a wristwatch where he sees someone else, someone that he cares about, alone inside of it, and then eventually he sees himself in it. And there's so much detail to this one songwriting idea that I feel like you can mine a whole lot from it, but just the notion of like thinking about someone who's separated from you, but also you can't tear yourself away from the fact that all of your thoughts about this person are very self-consumed. At the end of the day, all he's left with is himself, just looking at his wristwatch. And there is something to the catchiness, the repetition of this song, and just how, you know, day in, day out, it feels cyclical. It feels like time is passing in this song. And that's the overall theme of the album to me, is that Manning Fireworks is an album about being frustrated with how fast time is passing as you get older. Like, this is an album for people who are 27 but feel 50. Ergo us. But there is really something unique to the way that he goes about doing it all. There's also songs on here like another one of the three big heavy hitters for me, which is She's Leaving You, which has my favorite lyrical refrain on the whole album, just the night is long, we've all got work to do, which is so Wilco, it hurts. But the other artist I kept thinking of, particularly on the title track, the first song on here with the little, is it a fiddle, the stringed instrument that's on here? I can't
think so.
actually tell. But it is like a fiddle, is that the like, and like his voice and just like the way that this is set up, is that I just couldn't stop thinking about Ockerville River and how much this reminded me of like those first two albums like Black Sheep Boy. And I was like, I was right at home with that kind of lyricism, with that kind of playing. But there's also just, again, it's like what Morgan said about Magdalena Bay, and that this feels like a very quintessentially 2024 album, and that I don't really feel like this is a record that, yeah, it could have come out last year, but it wouldn't have met the moment last year, because it really does kind of feel like a lot of overriding art this year is about learning to be content with the material reality around you and the frustrations that come with that contentness and trying to seek that out. It's just like trying to find some kind of peace at the expense of something else. And Manning Fireworks to me captures that feeling so beautifully. And on the final sort of like tenet here, at my other sort of contender for favorite song being the closer here, which is Bark at the Moon, which I'll steal from Riley and say that this is the most Ghost is Born like coded thing ever, which again,
I mean,
playing
down to the
playing
fact that both albums have a song that ends with like an extended period, like a really extended period of guitar feedback. It feels like an almost deliberate reference point.
You know what?
This
I
moment.
have to say,
Ooh.
I'm sorry. I need to
No, go
take
ahead.
this, but like when I first like I was in my head the first time I heard this album, making the like I was formulating the Zevon comparison already, and when this song ends on a fucking Werewolves of London reference,
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Brain
I like
just
no, I was like I fucking hogged harder than I ever have in my life.
I totally fucking see it. And like Bark at the Moon is like a perfect microcosm of what we've been talking about with the writing here, because the whole conceit of this song, at the very end, like right before we get that guitar ambience, is him, ditching another person to go in his room and play Guitar Hero. And it's like, that's a very silly, like, okay, but there's something emotional about the fact that he just goes to his room, does something he loves doing, and then you get this beautiful piece of ambience. It's like, this is the peace that MJ Lenderman feels when he goes to his room and plays Guitar Hero. And I know that feeling, man. Like that's the feeling that keeps me going every single day. So he's able to perfectly distill that into the closer of this into a way that like sort of, this is why you come for MJ Lenderman, and this is why you stay. So I'm just thrilled to be on board with MJ Lenderman, because he's such an exciting voice, and he's an exciting voice in a way that very few people right now are.
And I don't know. Another thing I love about this, almost in contrast to Wristwatch, where in a sense both of these songs have their own like unique relation to material possession and how that can come in the way of what we love, or how it can serve as just a distract from who we love, rather, or alternatively, how it can just be something we box ourselves into, and but it can also be an escape. It can be freedom. It can be a form of personal relief. What I adore about this album so much is that there are no easy answers, and that's a fact Lenderman forces you to grapple with throughout listening to this album. For as flawed as the characters portrayed can be, there is still some core humanity, some gleam of yourself deep within there that I find so human, so beautiful in a way that so few other songwriters working today are able to touch on.
On the note of Wristwatch and Bark at the Moon, I mean, those two songs, to me, they're both songs about choosing to turn your back on someone, or not necessarily that, but like choosing to like push someone out of your life, basically. And Wristwatch especially is about, someone, the narrator of that song clearly is like, is being critiqued by someone in their life and is kind of essentially shutting themselves out and not realizing until too late how alone they've made themselves. But Bark at the Moon's interesting because I think it's a little bit more oblique. And I think what's so great about it as a closer is that as opposed to some of the other songs where you could, I think, make a clearer judgment about the way that the characters in the songs have kind of, their tragedy, essentially. Bark at the Moon is a little more oblique because I think the way you interpret the song and the decision to end the album, the way it is ended with a 7-minute guitar drone, I think that reflects who you are, the way you interpret that, whether the song is depressing to you or whether the song is comforting to you or whether, how you interpret it. I think it's a beautiful moment of oblique ambiguity that doesn't feel like, the artist is just doing it for the sake of experimentation or to, be different or whatever, but because they've crafted this set of stories and want to leave the album on a note where it's reflective, where the listener is given a certain amount of time to look inward and kind of reflect on what the album's ideas and the feelings of the album. Which is a beautiful thing to be able to do while also still making an album that's very catchy and very immediate and doesn't really waste your time, Morgan, what are your thoughts on Mr. Lenderman as another one of the many artists that we subject you to against your will?
Of the many artists that you subject to me against my will, this is, definitely on the more way up my alley side of them than, say, Playboy Cardi or whatever the fuck. And that is definitely held true to some extent in terms of listening to the album. I think this is a really good album. Obviously, the virtues of Mr. Slenderman's playing and particular tonal experimentation all over the album have been lauded, and deservedly so. That's the easy high mark of the album for me. I find the lyricism pretty compelling generally, but it's coated in this sort of slacker rock car seat headrest ass affectation that I have never cared for, nor will I ever care for, I don't think. If I was going to care for it, it would have happened many years ago. And it sort of holds me at a relative distance for how good I think the rest of this album is. That it's also something that it's like, that's clearly just the way that this dude operates. And that's cool,
It's certainly, there are certain affectations and certain, approaches and styles that, I can completely understand bouncing off you a little bit. I was definitely most interested in hearing on your perspective as the person who knows the most about guitars of the four of us, because, I kind of just find him a bit magical as a performer.
I will say I was fairly disappointed in listening to that 6-minute part of Bark at the Moon being just feedback, because I thought dude was gonna rip like a 6-minute crazy ass solo to send us out, and it's like, oh, he's
Check out his live album.
He's just on his board.
He
just on
does
his board as shit.
He does, I think, when he plays that song live, I think he does riff on it. And yeah, the live album from last year, which I still think is maybe the best thing he's put out, even though this is still my album of the year, is also worth hearing because that's a whole hootenanny. They shred like, they're a shredder thing.
Yeah, there's a good one. There's like a latent Neil Young Crazy Horse thing about this album that I don't think has ever really let go, and I would very much like to see that sort of let blossom fully in a studio format.
Yeah.
Much like it sounds like it does on this live album. I would love to see that go that direction for his next project. But it's very good.
So I'm gonna have a little, not a rant, but I'm gonna have a little mini point I want to make here, I guess, about indie music and musical culture right now, which is that it's an amazing and awesome thing that we have so many fantastic female songwriters, in such a huge position culturally, like speaking about their experiences. Because for so long, historically, especially in times like the 90s and stuff, indie rock and rock music for the alternative crowd was so male dominated, was so much about, masculine expressions of loneliness and pain and all that sort of stuff. So it's been really, really awesome to see in the last 10 years, especially, such a shift towards female representation in terms of like female singer-songwriters, female indie front women, that sort of thing, right? There have been so many that to a certain degree, it is almost refreshing to have an artist like MJ Lenderman. Not because, and this is not, I don't want this to be misinterpreted as, oh, we've had enough bloody women, yada, yada, yada. It's not that. It's that.
So true, though.
It's that there's like in having that experience and having those voices represented so well and so healthily and so generously across the last decade, it is especially nice to listen to a record like this and feel some fundamental truths about the male experience represented in 2024. I'm not saying we don't have enough music from the past, that speaks to that. But to have an artist like MJ Lenderman right now, who I know for a fact speaks to and resonates with a lot of young men and older men across the world, and his music, which is blown up, in online circles and in particular groups, is a vessel for a lot of figuring out how to process and deal with a lot of frustrations that come out of a world essentially that fosters a particular kind of harmful masculinity that makes you feel really lonely and makes you feel really broken inside. And MJ Lenderman is an artist who, this album is specifically about that experience and about that feeling. It is about masculine loneliness. It is about, it doesn't, it's not specifically, when I say it's about, it doesn't address the specific causes and societal, trends and all this kind of thing that lead men to be in a particular place that they are now, or lead men growing up in the 2010s and 2020s to feel isolated in the way that they do. But it speaks to what that experience feels like to be in that state, to be isolated, to be lonely, and to have been set up by the world essentially to have all of these confusing emotions that you were never properly educated on how to deal with. And now suddenly, you don't know how to interact with the people around you. You don't know how to be in relationships. You don't know how to navigate the world. And maybe I'm ascribing too much weight to this album, but this really feels like a beautiful and quite affecting document of that, of the outcome of that, and of the feelings that produces. So many of these songs speak to that particular kind of loneliness that is, unique to, I don't want to say unique to, but that is like characteristic of, growing up, being raised male, being kind of like socialized to be masculine in a certain way. This album just gets it, and it's a thing where it's like, you can't, it's not like you pick up certain lyrics to kind of analyze why it is. You just listen to it and you feel it. And it is in the songs too. Like there are lines in the songs that specifically allude to some of the stuff I'm kind of talking about, but you feel that what I'm talking about when you listen to this album. I don't want to just sort of sit here going through different lyrics on different songs. It'd be boring as fuck. She's Leaving You. I said before, Cry For Me by Magdalena Bay is my #2 song of the year. She's Leaving You by MJ Lenderman is my #1 song of the year. It just is. This is like, every so often you hear an indie rock song or any genre really, but let's just say indie rock. You hear an indie rock song, you think, this is a perfect indie rock song. This is like the form distilled to like the bare essentials of what it is, and those things done as well as they can be. And that's what She's Leaving You is.
The guitar riff during that chorus that Jake was mentioning earlier, that's so catchy. Oh gosh, that part has just been wormed into my psyche. It is like beautiful. It's almost got this kind of staggered kind of kind of a drunken stupor to it, where you're kind of staggering around and just coping with those emotions. Oh my, and just to convey that through your guitar work, the tone of the instrumental to complement your lyrics, It's sublime. It's brilliant. I'm sorry. I'm not going to stop sucking this album's wang. It is phenomenal.
This album isn't sublime. This is MJ Lenderman.
MJ Lenderman present.
This
Sublime featuring MJ Lenderman.
one thing
I'd listen to
Santorini.
that.
one thing he's good one thing he's
And I'll
really
practice Santorini.
MJ Lenderman covers the entirety of Robin the Hood.
one thing he's good at is musically being able to like mirror in the music a thing that he's talking about. And a great way he does this is a couple of ways he does this, and She's Leaving You that I always think about when I listen to that song is there's a bridge in the song, or like a second verse, where he talks about this girl who always found Las Vegas to be beautiful at night, but it's not about the money. She just likes the lights. And as he says that, there's like this little twinkling keyboard that comes in to like sound like a twinkling light. And that's just my favorite moment on the whole album musically. And then also just the way that this song about a guy whose girlfriend breaks up with him ends with just the girl's voice and the bass and drums at the very end of the song, and everything else is fallen out. Like beautiful little things like that that just mirror what's happening.
It's what I've always said. It's what I've always said about music. Function dictates form. What you are presenting on your lyrical front should be analogous with what you are presenting on your instrumental front. Yeah.
There's a line on the song Rip Torn, which is like, I think, a perfect synecdoche for what I was saying before about what this album represents to me, which is in terms of like the masculine experience, which is you need to drink some water, it'll kill the need to puke. You need to learn how to behave in groups. That's just
God, yes.
That just cuts me in half, that line.
Maybe you need to.
Yes,
me
like
alone.
fucking shut up.
Another absolute favorite of mine is the song You Don't Know the Shape I'm In, which is I think the most musically unique song on the album. We've already mentioned earlier, I think that it has this clarinet featured prominently, and I actually really love it. It could be really corny if the artist just can't pull it off, but just the idea of referencing in the lyrics the instrument that's playing and being able to do that without sounding stupid is a real feat that he pulls off. But also just the imagery in the song as well, which to me is very reminiscent of the Wednesday album. It's Sunday at the water park. We sat under a half-mast McDonald's flag. Broken birds tumble fast past my window, and you don't know the shape I'm in. That really, really gets me.
That meme of the fucking has Neil Young been reborn, but like unironically.
Yeah. Yeah, and just the song ends with a line as well. What else can you say to help a friend with a broken heart? And that just really digs into me. On My Knees is also fucking baller as hell. This song's so hard. Oh my God. And it's got a weird line about John Travolta's bald head that always makes me laugh.
Oh, that fucking John Travolta line is awesome. I second that 1,000%. Hell yeah.
Yeah, no, this is, I think, an MJ Lenderman lyrical masterclass, this song. Burdened by those wet dreams of people having fun. Because I know going on vacation brings the worst out of everyone. Every day is a miracle, not to mention a threat of bees' nests nestled in a hole in the yard of Travolta's bald head. Is it the TV static of a distant crowd, or maybe just the breeze? Wherever you'll find me on my knees. Beautiful poetry.
I want to die.
Anyway, that's all I really have to say. It's my album of the year. It's August's album of the year as well at this point in time. It's an absolute knockout. And I'm glad we could be back to talk about it in a timely fashion.
Yes. Hell yes. No, this is an album you need to hear if you haven't. If you've listened to this review thus far and are not entirely sold on this album, I don't know what else I could exactly, or any of us could even say to
I'll suck your fucking dick.
It's a crazy world we live in these days, and MJ Lenderman's making it a little less crazy.
So that you said that like I don't know, like an old like radio presenter from like the 80s would say or something. There's just something.
Yeah, I kind of realized that's what I was doing halfway through, and I just sort of committed to the bit.
We got a Joker Lips by MJ Lenderman coming up next, and keep warm out there. It's gonna be a cold winter. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. All of this I've just absorbed through pop culture. I don't know what actually it sounds like over there, but that's my little
You're not too far off.
yeah.
Actually, this is a funny side note. There's a local radio station called Boomer Radio here. And
Nice.
as you can expect, they play nothing but like 60s, 70s, 80s shit. And my favorite part is there's this fantastic record store, Painesville's Collectibles. Got to give them a shout out. They are always playing Boomer Radio whenever I'm in there, and it always cracks me up how the MC is just always so into this. This ain't your kid's station. This is nothing but classic rock and more rock. Boomer Radio from broadcasting live from Omaha, Nebraska.
Sounds like my kind of station.
I'll
Oh,
give you the frequency then.
one last detail.
What's the frequency, Ken?
One last lyrical shout out I want to give is that that I think it's apocryphal. I don't think Hemingway really wrote it, but that famous world's best story in the shortest amount of words, baby shoes for sale, whatever. That one is no longer the best, because the best short story in the fewest words is Kahlua Shooter, DUI Scooter.
Hell yes, it is.
The
So
thesis statement of this album is the cure to male loneliness. Somebody going, hell yeah, brother.
all right, that brings us to the end of this episode of Jams and Tea. Let us know what you thought of any of the albums we discussed today, and also the news items we discussed today as well. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll be back again soon with new news and reviews of new music soon. August, why don't you take us home?
As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Lucky Charms. They're magically delicious.